the name of Almighty Allah, the most merciful. Dear participants, the topic today is the functions of a promoter. And at the time of incorporation of a company, the foundation of a company is laid down by the promoter of a company. In this discussion today, we will discuss the functions of a promoter, the duties of the promoter, and the rights of the promoter. So let's start this discussion. Ms. Fatima, can you do the reading of the content material?
Sure, sir. Business idea. A promoter thinks of a business that can be profitably run. He may start a new business or enter into an existing line of businesses. He may take help of experts. He identifies the size, scope, and nature of business.
That's right. So you see, as we understand, that any business, the very inception of a business is based on the business idea. And here the role of promoter is of key nature. Promoter, in fact, is one who thinks about it, and then he does understand the pivotal point that the business which can be profitably run. He really perceived that idea, and in order to, in fact, reach to this logical conclusion that the business idea he intends to float or launch, that is practical, number one, and that is permissible under the eye of law, and that is one which will bear the fruits. So for that purpose, he can, of course, seek help and guidance by the experts. And moreover, while conceiving that business idea, the promoter always bears in mind that what should be the scope of the business and what should be the nature of the business. So once he has reached to this logical conclusion, he can, of course, float this idea, or he can undertake steps which are required to get a business incorporated or registered. But for that purpose, he is required to hold investigation. That investigation is basically in order to evolve the idea, in order to develop the idea. So, Mr. Fakhr, can you read this content regarding investigation, please?
Sure, sir. The promoter investigates the demand of the product. It determines the size of the business and availability of capital, labor, and raw material. He analyzes the cost of product and determines the level of competition. He also considers the relevant laws and regulations.
Absolutely right. You see, this investigation basically, it deals with two primary aspects. That first of all, whether that business is practically possible, that business idea, is it practically possible to evolve and develop the business idea? This is the first part. And the second part is that this is the promoter's role to see that whether that business, that venture is permissible in the eye of law. And for that purpose, he will, of course, look at this very fact that if it is practically possible, so the first and foremost thing is that he must ensure that what will be the source of capital for the business. As you know, that once capital is available, finance is available, then we need to see that how skilled labor can be employed, whether the skilled labor in that area is available. And the third aspect is that if it is a manufacturing business, then this needs to be seen that whether the raw material for that business is readily available. And this is why the promoter, they always make sure that they must establish the business, if it is in the field of manufacturing or in the field of production, where the raw material is easily available. And this is why we can see, if I quote an example of a sugar industry, whenever the promoters of sugar industry, they were working on the possibility of this new business venture, they always looked at that whether the agriculture area in that region is producing sugarcane, because that raw material which is required for the sugar factory is primarily the sugar cane. So if that is readily available, that is easily available. And this is why we see that in areas like Pakpatan, in other districts of Punjab, and certain parts of Sindh, we find that there is lots of sugar industry functional. In areas of Faisalabad and Toba Tek Singh, we come across lots of sugar factories, because that is a rich area for sugar cane harvesting. And on the other hand, areas like Narowal and Sialkot, you will find that the rice-based industry is in abundance in those areas. The reason is that the rice production or the rice is cultivated in that region. So promoter basically always try that the business idea he bears in mind, whether that is practically possible. And that is a main feature of his investigation. And once he reaches to this conclusion that capital is available, skilled labor is available, raw material is available, then he needs to look at this very aspect also during the course of investigation, that what kind of competition he will face, or his business will face, whether already there is an established industry, whether already business giants are already operating in that region, and he may not have his say if he will establish business in that area. And last but not the least is that he needs to bear in mind that the relevant laws and regulations, whether those laws and regulations provide for the commencement of that business or establishment of that business. I can quote an example. In Punjab, there are certain districts where sugar industry is banned. You cannot, establish a sugar factory in that region. And the government of Punjab has notified that in these districts, no new sugar industry will be allowed. There is a reason for that. And reason is that there are already ample number of sugar industries operating, and government does not want that this area will be overwhelmed by a certain type of industry. Likewise, if I quote another example, the petroleum marketing companies, if they look at this fact that there is already a petroleum marketing company's petrol pump situated in a certain area, they may not allow to open another branch in that area, because the consumer base and the utility and the business possibility are the areas promoter will bear in mind. And the last point is relating to laws and regulations. As I said, that if the law of the local law or the provincial law or the federal law prohibits that manufacturing, then of course that during the course of investigation, it will be found that this is not allowed in the country. For example, wine production is not permissible in Pakistan. So of course, if that business idea is floated, of course, on this very touchstone, that this is not permissible in the eye of law, no promoter will advise for launching that sort of business. So this is the part of investigation. I'd like to invite questions if there is any. Yes, please.
Yeah, sir, I just heard that there's a Chinese company that started production of wines and different kinds of alcoholic beverages in Pakistan.
Chinese company, I have also read in the newspaper basically, as I said earlier, that then you need to, the promoter need to see that whether there are certain exemptions available. As you know, that certain the pig's meat is not the pig's meat is not allowed in our country. But let's say that if it is exempted for certain area, or the use of wine is not allowed in our country, but for the Christians there are permits issued, and Christians, since there is no prohibition in their religion, on the basis of those exemptions, they are allowed to consume that content. So the point is that if there is law prohibits or law imposes this restriction that that business cannot be opened unless or until an exemption is awarded or permission is sought. So then on the basis of that given permission, that business can be launched. And I think that is the case with that Chinese company, as per the newspaper report, which is allowed to go for that business. So we are discussing the promoter's role. So far, we have discussed two key points. One was business idea, and the second was investigation. And now the third point I'd like Ms. Mahnoor to share with the public.
Preliminary contracts. The contracts which are entered into by promoters on behalf of a company yet to be formed are called preliminary contracts. These contracts are concerned with assets, supplies, property, mode of payments, etc.
That's right. You see, at the very inception of the business, at the start of the business, after perceiving a business idea, after conducting the due investigation, then the third part is that in order to commence with the business, or in order to draw a starting point, the promoter will enter into preliminary contracts. And those preliminary contracts can be, for instance, if company is of the view in the memorandum of articles and memorandum of association, in articles of association in memorandum of association, if the company board of directors is of the view that we must own assets, if it is a business banking company, for instance, and they have decided that we will open up a branch in a certain area after acquiring a land or after acquiring a building, we will not go on rent. Then, of course, they will acquire that asset. They will buy that piece of land, that piece of building, actually, in order to open up that branch, number one. On the other hand, if they have reached to this conclusion that no, we will have rented properties where we will open our branches. If it is Gourmet Private Limited, if it is Dose Private Limited, if it is Jalal Sons, for instance, they have reached to this conclusion that we will not construct our own buildings. We will have buildings on rent. Then the promoter will enter into a tenancy agreement with the landlords in order to acquire an area, in order to acquire a place to run that business. And of course, this will, if it is a manufacturing business, then supplies are important. And these different facets of business will be taken into care through the preliminary contracts, which promoter is allowed to enter. And this is important that once company is formed and it is incorporated and board of director is elected, then that is the discretion of board of directors to buy those contracts, which are the preliminary contracts, or not to ratify them. This will be the discretion of board of directors. Let me once again clarify this point, that the promoter, the person who has perceived the business idea, who has conducted the investigation, if he has entered into certain preliminary contracts, this is the sweet discretion of board of directors, the first board of directors duly elected, whether to continue with those contracts or whether to ratify those contracts, or the board of directors can negate those contracts, can nullify those contracts, can vitiate those contracts, or can decide, can set aside those contracts. That will be the discretion of board of directors, newly and duly elected. Any question for these 3 points we have discussed so far? All right. So let's take up the 4th point, and that is preparation for incorporation. And let me ask another participant, Ms. Asma Arif, to do the reading. Preparation for incorporation.
Yes, sir. Preparation for incorporation. The promoter fulfills following requirements. He determines the name of the company and place for registered office. He selects the first directors and members. He makes arrangement for preparation of memorandum, articles, and prospectus. He appoints underwriters, brokers, legal advisors, and auditors. He acquires government license if required. He assembles resources for starting the business. That's it.
Right. Thank you very much. And now let's take these points one by one. First of all, he determines the name of the company and the place for registered office. So yes, promoter, he make this determination that what will be the name of the company and what will be or where will be the principal office situated. He select the first directors and members. So since there is, that company is not incorporated, so he is the one actually who will select the first directors and members for the company. He makes arrangement for preparation of memorandum, articles of association, and prospectus. Of course, all the arrangements required in order to draft the memorandum and articles of association and prospectus, because at that after incorporation, prospectus is required to be issued, in which general public will be invited to make investment, and IPO will be launched for the company. He appoints underwriters, brokers, legal advisors, and auditors. So of course, promoter's duty is to appoint underwriters for the company, to make a contract with the brokerage houses for the shares of that company, and to appoint legal advisors and the auditors for the audits of the company. He acquires government licenses if required. Of course, in case of a business where government issue license, or let's say promoter has brought this business idea and conducted an investigation that this region is very suitable for running a medical and dental college. And the promoter has floated this idea that this region hasn't got any private or public sector medical and dental college. And you may name a district in Punjab. Let's say, to the best of my knowledge, we do not have any medical or dental college in Pakpatan. So if promoter has brought this idea, or in Burewala or in Arifwala, so promoter has brought this idea that in this region, there is no medical and dental college. There is one in public sector at Sahiwal, and but it has limited seats of 150 only. So there is a dire need, or there is a desperate need for a medical and dental college in Pakpatan, in Arifwala, in Burewala, in Behari, in Bahawal Nagar, etc. Or he can say that yes, this medical and dental college will have the catchment of students from all this region. So this is a bright idea that if we establish a medical college in this area, right? So this is a promoter has brought this idea. Now, this point actually that he acquires government licenses. What does this mean? He will make a contact, first of all, with University of Health Sciences, Punjab, Lahore, and he will ask that actually this is the medical college. We have allied teaching hospital, and this is our infrastructure. We like to have affiliation with University of Health Sciences. But before seeking an affiliation with UHS, he has to contact, or he has to make a contact with Pakistan Medical Commission in order to establish that medical and dental college, On one hand, uh, the promoter will seek an affiliation with the University of Health Sciences. He will also seek a recognition by Pakistan Medical Commission. So this is what it means. He acquires government licenses. So in order to establish a lawful, legitimate medical college, he is required to have a recognition by Pakistan Medical Commission, and the promoter is required to have affiliation with University of Health Sciences. So these are the licenses required. And likewise, license if you want to run a banking company, then license from State Bank of Pakistan. If you want to run a petroleum exploration company, then of course OGRA is the authority. If you want to establish a television station or a radio station, then PEMRA is the authority. So accordingly, you will seek a license from the regulator, and this is how you are allowed to run that business. Now the next point is he assembles resources for starting the business. Yes, of course, these are the key points in order to move on with the next step for establishing a business. Now, the next point is incorporation. But for the points we have discussed so far, the point number one was, of course, business idea. The point number two was investigation. Point number three was preliminary contracts. And number four was preparation for incorporation. So I'd like to invite questions at this juncture before we move on to the next point. Yes, please. Let me have Ms. Tania Ismail to do the reading.
Sir, I think she got disconnected.
No issue at all. Ms. Tania, please. Incorporation of
Yes,
company.
sir. After fulfilling the requirements, the promoter applies to the registrar in the prescribed form for the registration of the company. Required documents are attached with the registration form is deposited.
Absolutely right. So incorporation of company, this is the last point. So after fulfilling all the four requirements, here comes the last point, and that is incorporation of the company. An application is moved after the fulfillment of all cordial formalities. No problem at all. So this is how a company is incorporated. This is how a company is established. So with these words, I thank you all for your active participation.